Well, good sir, it's 2019 and I'm going to tear this movie apart. So Frozen 2 was directed by Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee, both returning from the first. And I quite liked the first one. It very much felt like a Disney classic, in spirit. It was original and it took its viewers on such a whimsical ride. So in the sequel, Elsa starts hearing a magical singing voice calling her north. So she and her gang travel to try and solve this mystery. So this movie does retain some of that great Disney spirit from the first. And part of that is due to this film not being a rehash of the first movie. I really appreciated how different the story was. It went in a completely different turn than the first. And for the most part, the characters fit into this succession of the story quite well. It initially felt like a natural progression for each of them. Also, the animation is an improvement from the first. There was one scene in particular that there were no characters in. It was just a wave crashing over some trees. And it looked like it could have been filmed like in our world. It didn't even look animated. That's how good this animation was. And while there isn't a big musical hit like Let It Go, I very much enjoyed all of the music in the movie. I think they did a good job writing it and animating the scenes in which they were sung. They were some of the most entertaining parts of the movie actually, and each main character kind of got their own song, which was cool. That's about all I have to say that was positive about the movie. Everything else kind of felt like an empty shell of the first. The biggest problem is that the story was an absolute mess. There are actually a couple good twists, so I'm not going to get into detail about it, but the first act sets up a good mystery. It really got me intrigued, and when the second act starts unraveling some of that mystery, it in turn unravels all the logic that this story had. Then the third act comes along. All logic is gone, and it felt almost like they had spent too much time developing everything in the first two acts that they just had to rush the third one and get this movie done. It's possible that it could have benefited from 15 minutes more, but it's also possible that this story was such a train wreck that it was unsalvageable by more runtime. There's so much spiritual lore that they kind of build up in the first act, but then it all just kind of collapses on itself. It's almost like they didn't think anything through after having that initial idea. So at about the midpoint in the movie, Kristoff is seen dealing with his major character conflict. He is then not seen again until basically the end. Then he shows up and is completely fine. Here's a diagram I drew of his character arc. Then at the climax of the movie, it's revealed that the major conflict the characters were trying to avoid all throughout wasn't really even that big of a deal. It didn't even pose much of a threat. It was pretty easily halted. The resolution at the end does not feel earned, it just feels rushed. It felt like the screenwriters had some great ideas initially, and they didn't write really anything beyond those initial great ideas. It's like they had writer's block or something and couldn't quite get those ideas fleshed out. And these problems were not as apparent initially. I actually had a pretty good time watching it. I could just tell that something didn't feel quite right. It's funny, it's well animated, and mostly entertaining at a first glance. At a deeper look, there's not much holding this movie together, and while kids will probably enjoy it, I don't think it'll go down as a classic like the first one did. I'm gonna give Frozen 2 a 6.5 out of 10. It might seem like I was really hating on this movie, but I really did have a good time watching it. There was just so much potential that was set up in the beginning, and it really just didn't fulfill. Well, thanks for watching my review, guys. What did you think of Frozen 2? Please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you for my next review.